By the fall of 1963, President John F. Kennedy and his political advisors were preparing for the next presidential campaign. At the end of September, the president traveled west, speaking in 9 different states in less than a week. On November 12th, he held the first important political planning session for the upcoming election year. At the meeting, JFK stressed the importance of winning Florida and Texas and talked about his plans to visit both states in the next 2 weeks. Mrs. Kennedy would accompany him on the swing through Texas. On November 21st, the President and First Lady departed on Air Force One for the tour of Texas. The presidential party went by motorcade to Carswell Air Force Base for the flight to Dallas. Arriving at Love Field, the Kennedys shook hands with a crowd of fans and headed towards their waiting convertible. Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie were already seated in the open convertible as the Kennedys entered and sat behind them. Since it was no longer raining, the plastic bubble top had been left off. The procession left the airport and traveled along a 10-mile route that wound through downtown Dallas on the way to the Trade Mart, where the president was scheduled to speak at a luncheon. Crowds of excited people lined the streets and waved to the Kennedys. The car turned off Main Street at Daly Plaza around 12:30 p.m. As it was passing the Texas School Book Depository, gunfire suddenly reverberated in the plaza. Bullets struck the president's neck and head, and he slumped over towards Mrs. Kennedy, and the governor was shot in his back. The car sped off to Parkland Memorial Hospital just a few minutes away, but little could be done for the president, and at 1:00 p.m., John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. Though seriously wounded, Governor Connally would recover. Later, police would arrest Lee Harvey Oswald, a recently hired employee at the Texas School Book Depository. He was being held for the assassination of President Kennedy and the fatal shooting shortly afterward of patrolman J.D. Tippit on a Dallas street. On Sunday morning, November 24th, Oswald was scheduled to be transferred from police headquarters to the county jail. However, on the way, Oswald was fatally shot by an assailant identified as Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner. Oswald died 2 hours later at Parkland Hospital. On Monday, November 25th, 1963, President Kennedy was laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery. On November 29, 1963, President Lyndon B. Johnson was appointed the Warren Commission. President Johnson directed the commission to evaluate matters relating to the assassination and the subsequent killing of the alleged assassin, and to report its findings and conclusions to him. After a 10-month investigation, the Warren Commission concluded that Oswald assassinated Kennedy, that Oswald had acted entirely alone, and that Ruby had acted alone in killing Oswald. However, there were many who questioned the circumstances of his assassination, and after a series of investigations over the next few decades, there is still uncertainty regarding who killed the former president. Many say that his killer was Lee Harvey Oswald on his own accord, but there seems to be holes in the evidence. There seems to be substantial evidence that the true mastermind behind the assassination of JFK was in fact the Cubans and the Soviets. Oswald, who taught himself Russian while serving as a Marine, received a discharge in September of 1959 by claiming his mother needed him to care for her. A month later, he defected to the Soviet Union. He renounced his U.S. citizenship and married a Russian woman named Marina in March of 1961. However, on June 2, 1962, Lee and Marina Oswald and their infant daughter left for the United States. They eventually moved into a house in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where he changed jobs frequently. On September 28, 1963, the CIA intercepted a call Oswald made to the Russian embassy in Mexico City. On the call, he can be heard speaking in broken Russian to Consul Valery Vladimirovich Kostikova, an quote-unquote identified KGB officer. Another Soviet official whom Oswald purportedly contracted, Valery Kostikov, was not only a KGB officer, but also was believed to have worked for the KGB's Department 13, which the CIA report described as the department charged with sabotage and assassination. Oswald had moved to the Soviet Union in 1959, spending 2.5 years there before returning to the United States when his minor celebrity as an American defector faded. In September of 1963, he traveled to the Mexican capital, visiting both the Cuban and Soviet embassies in an apparent attempt to move to one of the communist countries. Oswald had phoned the Cuban embassy in Mexico City about a visa, a conversation that U.S. authorities had intercepted. Quote, he also wrote a letter to the Soviet embassy in Washington, which was addressed to the man in the Soviet embassy who was in charge of assassinations and similar such activities. Quote, some believe Oswald had received orders from the Soviet or Cuban agents while in Mexico City. It is without question, however, that while he went to both the Cuban and Soviet Union embassies, ostensibly to receive travel documents. One theory that circulates among conspiracy theorists is that Oswald was given instruction on murdering the president of New Mexico City, either from the Cubans or the Soviets. It is clear from government files declassified in recent decades that Oswald's 6-day trip to Mexico was never adequately investigated by the CIA, the FBI, and the State Department, and as a result, by the Warren Commission, the panel named by President Lyndon Johnson to investigate the assassination, said an article in Politico. Evidence of his time in Cuba comes from a transcript of a 1967 cablegram recounted how a man named Angel Ronaldo Luis Salazar was interrogated at the Cuban embassy in Mexico City the year before by Ramiro Jesus Abrero Quintana, an identified Cuban intelligence officer, about Kennedy's assassination. During the interrogation, Salazar claimed he remarked that Oswald must have been a good shot. According to him, Abreu replied, "Oh, he was quite good. I knew him." After Kennedy's assassination, officials in Russia ruling Communist Party expressed concern that with a shaken leadership in the U.S., some irresponsible general could take advantage of the situation and shoot a missile at the Soviet Union. One source told the FBI that the Soviets considered the assassination to be a coup attempt, part of a well-organized conspiracy on the part of the ultralight in the United States, and believed it was not the action of a single person, but a carefully planned campaign. The memo notes that Russia rang church bells in Kennedy's honor, and the source emphasized that Soviet officials were confident Oswald had no connection whatsoever with the Soviet Union. The Soviets described him as a neurotic maniac who was disloyal to his own country and everything else, that Oswald never belonged to any organization in the Soviet Union and was never given Soviet citizenship. Yuri Nosenko, an alleged Soviet defector, said Oswald expressed a wish to defect shortly after arriving in Russia in 1959, but the KGB turned him down on the grounds that he was mentally unstable. Nosenko had been viewed by some as a possible KGB plant posing as a defector, who claimed Moscow was innocent of any involvement in the assassination. The Soviet envoy to the UN, Nikolai Fedorenko, underscored that the Kremlin preferred to have had President Kennedy at the helm of the American government. Despite the reports that deny that the Cubans or Soviets were ever involved in JFK's assassination, there is still solid evidence that they conspired together. Both governments had a hand in the training and informing of Lee Harvey Oswald, who would eventually go on to assassinate the president. Then, to save their own skin, they would deny any involvement with him and claim that he was mentally unstable. And so, the Cubans and the Soviets successfully diverted blame from themselves. But thanks to our efforts, their shadowy actions have been exposed, and the real details behind JFK's assassination have finally been set in history.